I'm glad you joined us for our Purim celebration. I'm Rebecca Malloy, and I'm with my husband, Eric, the dashing skipper of the SS Traku on Lochiel Lake in Nova Scotia, Canada's ocean playground,
Arr, matey.
and the former National Director of Bridges for Peace Canada. Right, Skipper?
Aye.
We were called to Winnipeg from our home in Nova Scotia in 2011. It was our privilege to be part of the great ministry of Bridges for Peace until 2019, when we sensed it was God's timing to return to our native Nova Scotia. We're still involved with Bridges for Peace, with Eric continuing on as emeritus on a part-time basis. For those of you who may not be familiar with Bridges for Peace, it is a Christian organization with our international headquarters in Jerusalem. We are Christians supporting Israel and building relationships between Christians and Jews in Israel and around the world. As this mug says, Bridges for Peace, your Israel connection. We are a ministry of hope and reconciliation. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, but we will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish people, speaking on behalf of Israel around the world. Through Operation Ezra Outreach, we assist orphans and widows, Holocaust survivors, victims of terrors, and new immigrants. We repair the homes of the poor and elderly, funding dental and medical aid. In spite of a worldwide pandemic, our food banks in Jerusalem and Carmiel fed over 22,000 needy Israelis per month this past year. A few years ago, I was a part of a team that visited 3 schools in Bet Shemesh. They are part of our Feed a Child program. It was deeply moving as the staff and students shared their gratitude for the outpouring of love and financial help from Christian supporters of Bridges for Peace. In 2020, our Project Rescue helped 4,000 Jewish people to immigrate to or make Aliyah from countries where it is very difficult. For those who cannot immigrate, we have Project Tikva, which means hope, to help the destitute Jewish people in Siberia and Ukraine. Our work in Israel is accomplished with the help of Christian volunteers from all around the world who come to bless the Jewish people. Our remaining projects and discipleship tours to Israel can be seen online at bridgesforpeace.com. Take it over.
Great. And I'd like to answer a question that you may be asking. Why would Christians want to know about Purim or even celebrate Purim? You'd likely agree with me that if something was important to Jesus and the apostles, that it probably should be important enough for us to learn something about and put into practice, in some ways at least, if at all possible. That would be true for read about in Leviticus 23, Passover and Pentecost and Tabernacles. And it's also true for Hanukkah and Purim, even though they're not listed in Leviticus, nor are they annual pilgrimage festivals to Jerusalem, but they were part of the spiritual and the celebratory life of Jesus and the early church. A little bit of homework for those that are interested. I encourage you to reread the book of Ezra and the book of Esther, remembering that Esther fits in between Ezra chapters 6 and 7, and it records God's providential care and protection of the exiled Jews who remained in Persia. And it tells of his loving and his covenantal care, and it gives the background for the celebration of Purim. For we Christians, biblical history or Jewish history is the only history that we have. We get to share that history with our Jewish friends. We don't actually have a history of our own. That started when what we call church history began, and even then, that started off as Jewish. But as it became more Gentile, that history became infected with a lot of Christian anti-Semitism, which remains to this day in parts of the church, which is another reason why Christians should remember Purim. Imagine if Haman's hateful anti-Semitic plans to exterminate all the Jews of Persia had been successful. Imagine that consequence. The very promises of the Messiah were at stake. This is a part of biblical history worth remembering, and Purim is a great time each year to do that. So we get to join the party to celebrate the joyous occasion of God's protection of the Jewish people. We see far too much evil and hatred against Israel and our Jewish family and friends today. All the more reason to put our arms around them and celebrate victories, past, present, and future. And that, my friends, is just a little food for thought. I'd like to take a minute and introduce our friend David Krupman. He's the executive director for the Center of Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation in Jerusalem, and he's been a dear friend of Bridges for Peace for many years. He's going to give us a little deeper teaching on Purim. And then after David, we welcome Bruce and Fern Kettner of Winnipeg. They too are long-term friends and supporters of Bridges for Peace, and they're actually going to show us their family's very old Megillah, which is the scroll of Esther, and they're going to share how celebrating Purim has impacted their lives as Jews. God bless.
Happy Purim, Bridges for Peace Canada. David Krupman here, Executive Director for Ortar Stone Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation. What an honor to give a message about the holiday to you. The question I'm going to be addressing is, should Christians celebrate Purim with the Jewish people? The short answer is, of course you should. The question you may ask is, where do you see this biblically? So I'm going to give you the last verse in chapter 8 in the book of Esther. This is verse 17. And in every province and in every city, when the king's command decree arrived, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the land professed to be Jews, pretended to be Jews, converted to Judaism. These are the many different translations of that particular word in Hebrew. For the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. And I want to give you an alternative translation, which is they finally understood the faith of the Jewish people because of understanding the fear of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Meaning these people understood what was happening right now, that Mordecai was now in charge of the royal court, and he was able to go ahead and convince the king to send out alternative letters to say to every single province that the Jewish people are able to defend themselves, was something that was very stunning to everybody in the empire of the king. And all of a sudden, they're beginning to realize, wait a second, we received a letter that these people will be destroyed in one day. We have the opportunity to do so. And then very shortly afterwards, they receive another letter saying, no, they can defend themselves. And many people understood this can't be coincidence. Something is happening here. So what is it about the Jewish people? What is it about their God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that is quite different from the gods that they're believing in? So here was the moment. After they see the Jewish people feasting and being happy in that decree that was given by the king, something took over many, many people in different cities. And they decided, I'm going to stay with the Jewish people. But why would Esther even allow these people to be entering into the community of the Jewish people? Well, there was a precedent with Isaiah. In chapter 56, 1 through 7, you will see there that Isaiah radically changes the status quo. If foreigners wish to anchor their faith to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and stay with the community of the Jewish people, until Isaiah came along, the status quo was, you're not allowed to be part of us. We're not going to accept you. And Isaiah saw something within the foreigners, within the pagans, that said no to their faith, to their own foreign worship, and they're going to join the Jewish people. One of the markers in Isaiah 56 was the Sabbath observance. There was something that they understood in themselves about the Shabbat, that they were celebrating the God of creation. So Isaiah saw something very, very radical happening with the non-Jewish people finally seeing the God of the world. And here, too, Esther is seeing something very, very radical as well. There was an opportunity to go ahead and destroy the Jewish people in one day. And suddenly there's a sea change that's happening because these people are internalizing for the very first time the faith of the Jewish people. It doesn't mean necessarily converted to Judaism, but they understood the faith of Judaism and they wanted to anchor their own faith to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So while those translations that say that they converted to Judaism or pretended to be Jews so they shouldn't be killed, my alternative translation is no. They themselves came to their own understanding of the importance of being in faith with God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So here we are in a situation today where there's a remnant in Christianity standing with the Jewish people, being proactive about Israel. Should you not celebrate the holiday with us? My answer is very simply, of course you should. Because you are understanding the faith of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I encourage you on Purim to read the book of Esther and see yourself as part of the story as well, and learn it and understand that Esther, written by the Holy Spirit, canonized into the Hebrew Bible by the Holy Spirit. A holiday is established through the Holy Spirit and is put on the Jewish calendar. This book is a Holy Spirit book. So it's written in code. So therefore, it takes us an opportunity to reflect on this book on this day. So one of the things by demonstrating that you're standing with the Jewish people on this day is reading the book of Esther. And one last thing. I know you have been our watchman on the wall of Zion, but you need to look at Purim as counter anti-Semitism day. You should look at Purim as counter anti-Semitism day. That is right. This is a book about anti-Semitism and how one particular person wanted to destroy the Jewish people in one day. And through the miracle of God's intervention in human history and the agents that were used to actualize God's plan of not destroying the Jewish people, well, this is a book on understanding anti-Semitism. So, what I ask of my Christian brothers and sisters, take the opportunity to be joyous on this holiday. You are celebrating with us of the miraculous intervention of God. You learn it through the book of Esther. Hopefully one day, when your borders are open, I will visit you and celebrate Purim with you. Blessings and Purim Sameach. Take care.
Happy Purim! We are the Kettners, Linda Fern and Bruce. And I want to thank Rick and Grace for inviting us to this event. And I want to mention that we have had a strong connection with Bridges for Peace going back almost 30 years from when we first met them in Portland, Oregon, and over 20 years since we've moved back here to Winnipeg. Well, you might notice that we're wearing costumes, right? And part of costumes is often wearing a mask, but not the medical mask, a masquerade. Because one of the themes of Purim is concealment, like Esther conceals her Jewish identity.
Or there's the way that because of Haman's grandiosity and pride, King Ahasuerus' request to him for advice on how to bestow honor on someone fills Haman with conviction that, of course, the someone in question could be none other than his own glorious self. He thus sets himself up to entirely miss, or we might say conceal from himself, the possibility that the honors he's suggesting to the king are to be given to the man he most despises. And in fact, that he, Haman, will ultimately be the lowly functionary who has to perform the job of a servant for the object of his hate. Brilliant.
And God never reveals himself in this story. It's the only book in the Bible where his name is not mentioned. Even though the story appears to be filled with chance meetings and fortunate or unfortunate circumstances, depending on the character's point of view, God is unquestionably called upon through fasting and prayer and is clearly the hidden force behind Esther's ultimate success.
My mother's immediate family was part of a large Orthodox clan in Cleveland, Ohio, Jews who were highly dedicated to keeping Torah alive in America after the Holocaust through publishing books, starting schools and yeshivas, seminaries, and being leaders in their own congregations. Many eventually moved to Israel, which was a new state when I was born. As a very little girl, I remember the excitement of going to shul or synagogue when I was old enough to stay up and attend a Megillah reading on Purim Eve, the Megillah in this case being the Scroll of Esther. I was used to quiet Shabbos mornings there, but this was something else entirely. Lights on, people with loud noisemakers, costumes, masks, even the leaders. And I'm pretty sure I was dressed up as a queen too, though I was somewhat dazed as I was handed a grogger, that's Yiddish for this kind of noisemaker. And it's used every time the name of wicked Haman or Haman is read within the story in order to drown his name out of the earth forever. And it sounds really noisy with a room full of people doing that. As I took my grogger, the person handing them out waved my favorite uncle to take me right up to the bima or pulpit at the very front, where he lifted me up and sat me beside lots of other little kids on the edge of the big stender. Isn't that a great word for a lectern or the table that the reader stands behind? Smack in the middle of all the action. And then we heard some of the adults shouting, "Shah, Shah!" Oh yeah, that's Yiddish for shh. And the reading began, and there ends my story. But before we move on, I have a miniature Megillah to show you all that belonged to my grandpa. It is hand scribed on parchment, and it was most likely made in Poland from where his family made their way to America. It's in very good shape, and it unrolls a lot farther. It's taped or somehow glued together at the seams, and it's quite a long scroll.
In fact, it's the whole Megillah.
It's the whole Megillah.
I was raised in Winnipeg in a Jewish family that was not religious, but was very dedicated to supporting the state of Israel. And we did have a strong Jewish identity. We did celebrate major Jewish festivals in the home, and my earliest memory of Purim was baking hamantaschen with my mother. As many of you know, hamantaschen are triangular filled pastries, and they're to be shared with family and friends in order to fulfill one of the 4 commandments for Purim, the one of Shalach Monas. It's the one where we share food gifts. Hamantaschen is Yiddish for Haman's pocket or hat, and in Israel, they're called Haman's ears. And eating hamantaschen symbolizes the demise of the villainous Haman through destroying his memory. They're often filled with prune or apricot, sometimes ground poppy seeds, and they can even be filled with chocolate. My mom's filling was dried fruit and walnuts and a generous amount of nabob strawberry jam. And what I remember most was the meat grinder, which was brought out only once a year for this occasion. So let me go ahead and demonstrate how she made hamantaschen. So I have here a meat grinder very similar to what I remember my mother having. Although it seems small, I think it's probably the size she had, but I was much smaller when I was doing it. And we've already pre-ground some prune and date filling here. And I just wanted to do this because I remember so much how much fun I had grinding the fruit. So I've got some apricots in here. I'm just going to grind a tablespoon and add it to the filling. The feeling itself is just brings back those memories that are so important in making the cultural connection. And we'll just stir that in. And then I remember I also got to be able to cut the circles using a glass. So my mother taught me to get flour onto the glass and then make circles. And the goal was to try to make these as close together so that you could get as many as possible out of it. And it really struck me that we didn't waste anything because the scraps that we cleared away from it, we would re-roll again and again and again until we had only enough for a single hamantaschen. And at that point, the scraps I got to eat, which was really a lot of fun. So we would take about a tablespoon, and this was something I wasn't very good at, so I watched my mother do this, and turning it into the triangular shape and pinching it together, she would create the Hamantaschen, Haman's hat. One more. So what we're going to do, we're going to throw these into the oven. And by the end of our presentation, I hope they'll be ready. While the Hamantaschen are baking, this would be a great time for Linda Fern to teach a Purim song.
And this is a very simple song about Purim being a big holiday for the Jewish people, and that we have masks and noisemakers and songs and dances. And the chorus, I say, Hava Narisha, and I want you all to sing Rush, 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 three rushes 3 times. So that's 9 rushes altogether. So when I get there, you'll know it. You have a noisemaker?
Yep.
Okay. It goes like this. Chag Purim, Chag Purim, Chag Gadol HaYudim, Masechot Rashanim, Zmirot Rikudim. Hava Narisha, Rush, Rush, Rush. Hava Narisha, Rush, Rush, Rush. Hava Narisha, Rush, Rush, Rush. Barashanim.
What's that sound I hear?
Oh.
It sounds like a grogger.
Oh, I know, it's the buzzer.
Oh no!
Smoke!
No, there's smoke in the kitchen! Our Hamantaschen!
Oh my gosh!
Oh my gosh!
Hamantaschen! Oh, I hope they'll be all right.
Oh, thank goodness. It was just some filling that was burning on the bottom.
Oh, phew.
And here they are. Our finished Hamantaschen. And I'm going to take a taste.
Yum.
Mmm.
Almost as
Just
good
like
as Mom.
Happy Purim, everyone.
We will continue the reading of the book of Esther, not the entire book, but focus on chapters 5, 6, and 7, the heart of the story. Queen Esther has just heard her uncle Mordecai's question to her, and who knows but that you've come to your royal position for such a time as this. We begin our reading with Esther's request to the king. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. King Ahasuerus was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther sitting in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked,
"What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you."
If it pleases the king, let the king together with Haman to a banquet I have prepared for him.
Bring him on at once, so that we may do what Queen Esther asked.
So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther,
Now, what is your petition? It will be granted. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted.
My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question.
Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Haman arraigned himself and went home. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he'd elevated him above the other nobles and officials.
And that's not all. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction. As long as that Jew Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate.
His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows set up, reaching to a height of 75 feet, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman. And he had the gallows set up. That night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway and who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus.
What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?
Nothing. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said,
Who is in the court?
Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman standing in the court.
Bring him in.
When Haman entered, the king asked,
What should be done to the man the king delights to honor?
Now Haman thought to himself,
Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?
So he answered the king,
For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most trusted princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the streets, proclaiming before him, This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.
Go at once. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew that sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you've just recommended.
So Haman brought the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the streets, proclaiming before him,
This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.
Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. While they were still talking with him, the king's attendants arrived and hurried Haman way to the banquet Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman
Boo!
entered Queen Esther's
Yay!
banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked,
Queen Esther,
Yay!
what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted.
If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold to be male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would have justified disturbing the king.
King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther,
Yay!
Who is he? Where is he, the man who would do such a thing?
An adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman.
Boo!
Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman,
Boo!
realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther
Yay!
for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman
Boo!
was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining.
Yay!
The king exclaimed,
Will he even molest the queen while she's in the house with me?
as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's
Boo!
face. Then Harbona, one of the king's attendants, said, a gallows reaching to a height of 75 feet stands by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai.
Yay!
He woke up to help the king. The king said,
Hang him on it.
so they hanged Haman on the gallows he had set up for Mordecai. Then the order
Yay!
decided.
Oh, and then we're supposed to change. Now, you
Good evening. My name is Ray Albois, and I'm a representative for Bridges for Peace Canada. And I would just like to say thank you to all of you who have taken the time to be with us this evening. This is our first ever virtual Purim party, and it's been our pleasure to be able to celebrate Purim with you and with our Jewish friends in this unique way. As we've heard tonight, Purim is a time of celebrations. It's a joyful time. It's a time that commemorates the Jewish people being saved from annihilation by Haman and his state-sponsored plan to kill all the Jews in the known world. The heroic efforts of Mordecai and Queen Esther and the invisible hand of God have been cherished and remembered for generations. In keeping with Mordecai's words, Purim is still remembered and celebrated by Jewish people up till today. Traditionally, Purim begins with going to the synagogue to hear the Megillah read, and afterwards, people go back to their homes for a time of celebration. There's a feast has been prepared, and it's a time of great joy. Many people give gift baskets of food to family and friends. Another important tradition at Purim is to remember those less fortunate. Remember those who are in need. Sadly, anti-Semitism is still a serious issue in many parts of the world today, just as it was in Mordecai and Esther's time. The livelihood, and in extreme cases, the lives of Jewish people are threatened daily in some countries. Perhaps you're here for such a time as this. With a simple phone call or the click of a mouse, you could help a Jewish person or family escape persecution by donating to Bridges for Peace Project Rescue.